So today we're going to deep into the story of rude tourists that insults a black waiter, then he gives them a lesson they will never forget. The evening was lively at La Belle Vie, a renowned fine dining restaurant known for its impeccable service. Among the seasoned staff was James Carter, a polished, well-educated black waiter who had earned the respect of both patrons and colleagues. If you want to hear what will happen, make sure you subscribe now for more powerful stories and follow for updates. Enter a group of wealthy tourists, loud, arrogant, and dripping with entitlement. From the moment they stepped in, their behavior was a red flag. They dismissed the hostess with a wave and demanded the best table, making it clear they expected special treatment. As James approached with a warm, professional greeting, the sneers began. One of the tourists scoffed. "Oh, great, let's see if this guy can even get our order right." The others chuckled, exchanging condescending glances. But James, he didn't flinch, because he knew. James remained poised, unfazed by the snide remarks. He had encountered rude customers before, but there was something particularly vile about this group. Their laughter carried arrogance, their words laced with entitlement. Make sure to subscribe now for more powerful stories. Follow the channel for more updates. As he took their drink orders, one of the men leaned back and smirked. "You sure you can handle this? Don't mess it up." Another added, "Bet he got this job through some diversity quota." The table erupted in laughter. James met their gazes calmly. "I assure you, sir, I'm more than capable." His voice was steady, professional, yet firm. One of the women rolled her eyes. "Whatever, just make sure my wine is the most expensive one you have, and don't take forever." James nodded and walked away, but not before catching the hushed whispers and amused snickers behind him. He could feel the eyes of other patrons on him. Some shocked, others waiting to see how he'd respond. At the bar, his colleague shook his head. "Man, how do you put up with that?" James smiled slightly, by showing them exactly who they're dealing with. He returned with their drinks, serving each one with flawless precision. As he poured the woman's wine, she scoffed. "Took you long enough. Hope you didn't spit in it." James set the bottle down gently. "Mum, we hold ourselves to the highest standards here. I'd never compromise the quality of service, no matter who I'm serving." Something in his tone made the table shift uncomfortably, but they weren't finished. One of the men leaned in, his voice low but dripping with condescension. "You talk pretty fancy for a waiter." "What, you think you're better than us?" James smiled, polite yet knowing. "Not at all, sir. I simply take pride in my work, just as I'm sure you take pride in whatever it is you do." The table fell silent. Other diners were now fully tuned in. James straightened, his posture radiating confidence. The lesson had just begun. The silence at the table was thick, their laughter now gone. James remained composed, his confidence unsettling them more than any angry outburst ever could. One of the men cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "So what? You think you're some kind of genius just because you know how to pour a drink?" James smiled. "Well, I do have a degree in hospitality management, fluent in 3 languages, and trained under a Michelin-starred chef. But no, I wouldn't call myself a genius, just someone who values hard work." A few nearby diners murmured in approval. The shift in the room was palpable. The tourists, who had walked in expecting to command the space, were now the ones being quietly judged. The woman with the wine crossed her arms. "You expect us to believe that?" James nodded. "I don't expect anything. But if you'd like proof, I'd be happy to discuss the complexities of French wine regions, the intricacies of 5-star service, or the economic impact of the hospitality industry." He gestured toward their untouched glasses. "Or we could simply enjoy the drinks I selected, which I assure you are exactly to your taste preferences." One of the men looked down at his wineglass, suddenly uncertain. Another shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then an older gentleman at a nearby table raised his glass. "To excellent service and the dignity of a true professional," he said loudly. A few other diners echoed the sentiment, lifting their drinks. James inclined his head graciously. The tourists, now visibly embarrassed, muttered amongst themselves. One of them finally reached for his wallet, pulling out a wad of cash. "Here," he mumbled, setting down an excessive tip. "For the trouble." James looked at the money, then back at them. "I appreciate it. But I'd rather see respect than dollars." He picked up the cash and turned toward a junior staff member. "Here, this is for the kitchen staff. They work just as hard and deserve recognition too." The tourists had nothing left to say. As James walked away, the rest of the restaurant watched in admiration. Tonight, respect had been earned. Not by money, but by dignity, intelligence, and unshakable grace. The lesson was learned. The tourists sat in awkward silence, their confidence shattered. Their usual tricks, mockery, arrogance and money, had failed them. Instead of putting James in his place, they had been schooled in a way they never saw coming. One of them, the woman who had scoffed at the wine, finally spoke. "Look, we didn't mean anything by it." Her voice lacked the usual sharpness. James, now clearing the table, paused and met her gaze. "Intent doesn't erase impact," he said simply. She swallowed hard, looking away. The rest of the group avoided eye contact, suddenly eager to finish their meals in silence. As James walked toward the kitchen, a fellow waiter grinned. "Man, you really showed them." James chuckled. Didn't need to. They showed themselves. At that moment, the restaurant owner stepped out from the back. He had witnessed everything. "James," he said, clapping him on the shoulder, "that was some of the finest customer service I've ever seen." James smiled. "Just doing my job." The owner shook his head. "No, you did more than that. You turned ignorance into a teachable moment. That's a rare skill." A few tables away, a young black couple who had been quietly observing the entire exchange raised their glasses to James in silent appreciation. He nodded back, knowing the moment had meant something to them too. As the night wound down and the tourists finally left, their energy was different, muted, thoughtful. Would they truly change? Maybe, maybe not. But one thing was certain, they would never forget this night. And neither would anyone else who had witnessed it. James returned to his work, not for applause, not for validation, but because he loved what he did, and he did it with pride. As the restaurant emptied out, James took a moment to breathe. The night had been intense, but he felt no anger, only satisfaction. He hadn't needed to raise his voice or retaliate. Dignity had spoken louder than any insult ever could. Back in the kitchen, the chefs and staff gathered around. One of the younger waiters, a nervous new hire, looked up at him with admiration. "I don't think I could have handled that the way you did." James smiled. "You will. Because respect isn't something you demand, it's something you carry with you. And when you do, no one can take it away." At that moment, the restaurant owner stepped in, holding his phone. "James, you're trending," he said with a chuckle. James frowned. "What?" The owner turned the screen toward him. A diner had recorded the entire exchange, posting it online with the caption, "Class over ignorance. A waiter's lesson in respect." The video had already racked up thousands of likes, shares, and comments. James sighed, shaking his head with a grin. The owner patted his shoulder. "I know, but sometimes the right moments find the right audience." James simply nodded, stepping out onto the restaurant floor for one last glance at the now empty tables. The night was over, but the lesson, that would live on. If you want more inspiring stories, subscribe now and follow for updates.